As a professional DM, I run a lot of one-shots, and I design most of them. So if you're a GM looking for some one-shot inspiration, or you're looking to create your very first one-shot, you're in the exact right place. Stick around to the end. Let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to want to do before anything else, because this determines exactly what sort of one-shot you're going to be running, is pick a level. Now we're using D&D for these examples, but any system it works pretty similarly, whatever level you want your characters to be at. I almost invariably use level 3. I'm sure we've all heard horror stories about accidentally killing an entire group of level 1 PCs. It happens. Level 3s are slightly more robust. You're looking at 15 to 20 hit points on average, and crucially, your characters have started to get their own identification. You're no longer fighter with a sword or fighter with a bow. You are instead a champion fighter with a great sword, or an echo knight with a bow. Additionally, because of the way D&D is designed, level 3 is a huge power spike and allows your characters to do things that you might not expect. A group of 4 level 3 characters can fairly easily take down some pretty nasty threats. Many monsters up to CR7 are reasonable to use against such a group of players, as long as they know what they're doing, of course. Remember, CR is balanced around multiple daily fights. In one-shots, you're at best getting 2. So don't worry terribly much about this big old number. A level also helps set expectations. If you're running a level 3 one-shot, it's likely that things are going to be interesting but not overwhelmingly dangerous. You're not going to be fighting any ancient black dragons. Whereas, if you're running a level 20 one-shot, you can expect plane-hopping shenanigans, banishments, and wishes galore. At level 3 we're talking relatively local adventures. Perhaps level 10 one-shots are set at something of a national level. The point is, this helps you decide the scope and scale of the game you want to create. Which is also why level 3 one-shots are a heck of a lot easier than level 20 to design. Next, you're going to pick a theme. Now a theme can be anything from traditional knightly deeds to pirate adventures to a romp through the Feywild. But remember, you're not reinventing the genre. Most one-shots will last somewhere between 2 and 4 hours, and you've got to tell a coherent story in that time. Nothing is worse than a one-shot that's scheduled for one single game that spirals out into 2.5, requiring scheduling across an entire month. If you want to run a satisfying one-shot, be concise and don't get too fancy with it. Your genre is there to give you a list of tropes and expectations that your players might have going in. If you tell your players that there is piratical high seas adventure at stake, well, 1, that's going to affect the characters they bring, and 2, it's really going to affect their expectations for the game. If there is no ship in sight, and no swashbuckling, sword-wielding, gun-toting crazy to fight, they may well be disappointed. Now I will give you a high-level tip. I give you my blessing to subvert one single expectation or genre trope in your one-shot. Let's say you're running a knightly game, where all of your players are to be knights, squires, heroes of the realm, off to save a damsel in distress imprisoned in a tower. Now we know what we expect. We expect traditional fairy tale stories. Perhaps a small dragon to slay along the way. Some grand tower on the top of a hill overlooking a dark haunted forest. All of this is in your head the moment you establish your theme, which is why it's so important to establish this as early as you can. You can subvert one single thing. Perhaps the princess's nasty captor is not so much a kidnapper as a guardian to make sure that nobody weak gets through. Perhaps in actual fact the tower itself is alive. and it wanders the land kidnapping princesses to slowly consume them inside its gigantic stone bowels. The point is, as long as you know what theme you're within, subverting one thing can make for an immediately intriguing one-shot. But you don't have to. Your players will be absolutely fine and dandy with a classic adventure that they can anticipate and that they're excited for. Now, it may sound dull, but play to their expectations. They're coming to your table because of what you've already told them about your one-shot. Oh, we're going to be pirates out on the high seas. Don't take that away from them. They're here for it. Trust me. Third step to designing your one-shot is to design a space or three. Now, for most adventures, you're going to be travelling from A through B to C. That is a classic adventure structure. Some adventures will require just one space, like an urban adventure, perhaps to find a murderer at large within a large city, or a single dungeon that has got you trapped inside and you have to solve the puzzles to escape. For those, you only need one space. For the rest, 2 to 3 is a pretty solid number. If you design 5 or 6 individual locales for your one-shot, that's not a one-shot. That's the start of a campaign. The only exception to this should be if you're running a level 20 one-shot and you've got characters bamfing all over the multiverse trying to figure out what big bad to smack into next Tuesday. For the vast majority of one-shots, you need less spaces developed than you think. Let's go back to that murder example. You need perhaps a crime scene where you're going to start your adventure. You need 1 or 2 spots where evidence can be gathered. Most will be at the crime scene, perhaps a house of a suspect where they're going to go and interview, a local tavern where the suspect is known to haunt, and one final space actually set out as the showdown space. You don't need that many locations. Sure, your players may go and visit a shop, may go and ask 6 different tavern keeps, but you don't need to make a map of those places. You don't need to give them any consideration at all. At this stage, you can improvise that. In terms of designing spaces for your players to spend time in, well, there isn't terribly much time. So you need a maximum of 3, especially if one of them is a complex series of caves or a dungeon to be explored. In that case, cut it right down. If your one-shot starts on the shore and they need to then take a ship to get to the dungeon or cave that they're supposed to be exploring, you've wasted 45 minutes with the role-playing and messing around in the town and on the ship. Your beautifully crafted dungeon might not even see its end. The next step is picking your encounter. Now, I'm not saying monster, and note that I am saying encounter. There will be multiple encounters in your one-shot, but I'm thinking the big tentpole encounter. The one that shows up towards the end of the one-shot, the big bad, or the ultimate challenge, the great test, the riddle, based on the entire dungeon prior. In my experience, if you are going for a combat-focused endgame to your one-shot, one big interesting monster is always really fun. My strategy is, if your players have got through the one-shot relatively quickly, always have in your mind a couple of smaller minions that you could add to that fight to make it more interesting and dynamic. Not terribly scary minions, mind, but just something to distract your players a little and spread out the action economy in your favour slightly. That's if you've got time. If you're running towards the end of a session and you've got maybe an hour left to fight the big bad guy, and he's got 130 hit points of health to chew through, maybe just scrap those minions and have your players wail on the big guy. It's relatively satisfying, even if the action economy is heavily weighted in your players' favour. You don't want them to lose. I will say, one monster fights are sometimes boring because of this whole action economy. Oh, we all hit it a bunch, it downs one of us because it does loads of damage, we get them back on their feet, and we all hit it. That cycle will just repeat often. Which is why if you're running a single encounter enemy at the end, It should be because of time pressure, and you can rush through that fight. You can make it scary with these big hits, and try and hurry through combat without worrying about lots of little mooks or bodyguards to have their little turns in the midst of everything. If you are going for a social encounter, I will say I would recommend having some sort of combat planned in along the way. This can be a relatively simple or low level combat, or a set of combat adjacent traps that your players are going to be able to use their abilities to solve. Because it's all well and good having a social encounter at the end, but if there is absolutely no combat or traps or puzzles, then your bard's going to have a great time, but your barbarian is going to be itching to smash something. I have a one-shot that I've designed with 2 optional boss fights that many players decide to skip, and that's partly within the adventure design. It is designed to end with this grand puzzle that wraps up the whole dungeon in a nice pretty little bow. But giving your players the choice to fight or not fight is a really useful tool in getting buy-in. It gives them the illusion of agency, even if 9 times out of 10 the players are going to choose not to engage with the horrifically powerful looking Death Knight in the corner, and can to a small extent help with those players who are feeling a little left out of the social and skill interactions. There's always the option to fight, which means they're being strategic by choosing not to. And the final thing on your checklist, this is to have the entire bare bones of a one-shot fleshed out almost entirely, is to just double check to make sure that all of the elements of your role-playing game are there. It's all well and good saying that you've got a brilliant social one-shot designed, where your players are going to be Hercule Poirot-style detectives moving around a gigantic ballroom to find out who murdered the Lord and Lady of the Court. If you're spending 3 or 4 hours in that, more power to you. But why are you playing D&D? The 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons are combat, exploration, and roleplay. I personally would broaden combat to an encounter that requires the use of class skills, but that's personal taste. If you're going bare bones basic, try and make sure that you have at least the option of including all 3 of these within your one-shot. It can be a lot to think about. You've got an entire theme to worry about. You've got 2 or 3 locations. You've got to go from A to B, and you've got this big fight planned near the end. And you can often get lost in all of that. But at this last step, you just need to sit back and say, do I have the capability for my players to use what they have? Do I have a trail of footprints that can be followed via survival? Or is there some deep lore that could really benefit my players from knowing it through a history or arcana check? Do I have a trap that a rogue could potentially find? Are there individuals in this adventure who could speak to my players? If not, why not? It is fine for your players to carry the roleplay by themselves, but especially for newer players, if you're trying to get them into the game, show them everything. Why can't that iron golem guarding the treasure be reasoned with? Perhaps its creator has imbued it with a small amount of consciousness. Enough, at least, to have a conversation. Perhaps enough to be deceived. Your combat or encounter, as a rough guide, should last no more than 1.5 to 2 hours. That is all encounters, so if you have multiple stages of an encounter, then bear that all in mind. I find that in a 3-ish hour one-shot, your players tend to start getting bored of fighting at about the hour mark. Exploration is crucial. Players want to feel clever for figuring things out, be that moving through a dungeon finding a secret door, or following a trail that they picked up through investigation of the murder scene. Players want to feel clever, players want to use their skills and abilities to figure out what's going on in the world. Make sure there is some exploration element that can include an encounter, but does not have to. Often exploration takes place in the B section, starting in A, moving through B to get to C. In that encounter design, your exploration is in the centre. And finally, roleplay. Now this can be up to choice. It can be up to an hour in some cases, even more if your one-shot is socially focused. But do remember to include exploration and at least an encounter of some description. If you're designing a one-shot in a system, you should try and show off what that system can do. I find that incorporating all of these things from the very beginning of the DM's guide is often a really useful step to making sure that your one-shots feel satisfying. So, to summarise, you're going to pick a level for your game to begin. You've got to choose a theme that interests you and your players. Then, design 1 or 2 spaces. Doesn't have to be in depth. Afterwards, pick your big old encounter at the end, your show-stopping piece, your undead pirate, your serial killer, your cloud giant up in his cloudy lair, or perhaps a particularly fiendish puzzle that builds off the dungeon before it. And 5, make sure that you're satisfying all the core parts of this game. Let's face it, Dungeons & Dragons is 3 games in a trench coat. I mean, quite literally. From its very conception, it was a exploration game tacked on to a already existing combat system, which grew into a role-playing game. So make sure you're satisfying all of those gameplay experiences, unless you've got a really good reason not to. And with that, you have pretty much a one-shot. All that remains for you is to get some players together, get some scheduling done, and maybe flesh out a couple of your locations to the extent that you're comfortable running them. Most important thing is, when you're confident, run it. Because there's nothing worse than a one-shot just sitting on a shelf waiting for just the right people or just the right time. If you've worked on this thing, even if you've used the easy steps I've outlined so far, it's a labour of love, it's an investment. You're telling a story. Get some players, get in the game, and have a blast. And this should serve as an excellent framework for you to cling on to when things start going a little mad. So, thank you for watching. I hope this kind of condensed advice has been really useful in giving you everything you need to get your one-shot off the ground, because you should. There are so many people out there looking to play in a game. I'm certain some of your friends would be more than happy to play in yours. Especially if your one-shot is designed with these tips in mind. So get out there, get planning, pick a theme you like, and have a great time. I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master, and I'll see you in the next one.